dear participants, we continue our webinar, and the next presentation is again from Well. It's second part of his presentation, dedicated to the ETF support to the issues of development of public-private partnership and vet school autonomy and accountability. Okay.
Okay. Following the logic on the roadmap traced by the green paper, on which we jumped first into the broad identification of issues that could support as a leverage for change the system from the governance and financing perspective. We identify these issues of sector councils, regional councils, center of excellence, also as key policy options for reforming the issue of regional governance and optimization and rationalization of the network. So then one important issue also was the issue of public-private partnership. The issue of public-private partnership, what we did is not just to focus only in Ukraine, but we coordinate the work with Ukraine to be part of a study with another three partner countries of ETF. So in the green paper, basically we identified already that the issues for public-private partnership is the tradition on cooperation in Ukraine in forms of what it could be considered public-private partnerships, such as, for example, sponsorship, practical training centers, and internships. But we realized that it was a little known about its result and impact, even internally in the country. So the financial crisis and also the situation of Ukraine, economy with the war, etc. So and also for modernizing the vocational education and training system, it was calling really for the more participation of private sector in terms of investment and engagement. So because mostly, and the tradition in Ukraine, like in other Eastern European countries, is that the public sector is the main actor. So little contribution of the private sector was there. So important issue as a motivating factor was that, as Arjen said at the beginning, employers were really not happy with the skills provided by the public sector. But also one issue that we identify that in this picture, the informal sector in the economy plays a significant role. So we propose there first evaluating a sample of practices of public-private partnership in Ukrainian bed. We also propose, let's say, reshape social dialogue in bed with a lifelong learning perspective, also in regional and sectorial levels, which is also related to the assessment capacities of the sectoral organizations, and in this case also related to the role that should play in the decentralization process of the regional councils that we finished our discussion before on that. So we propose also a more expanded role for regional councils on this, also for networking with private sector from regions. So on this identification of practices, we identify that the case of the practical training centers driven by many cases employers and companies, it could be a good case also for discussing the issue on how to make these PPPs, public-private partnerships, from the perspective of the centers of excellence, integrating in the governance and financing of the center the private actors. We propose also the issue of delivering some kind of guidelines also for governance and financing of apprenticeship system, including the use of tax sections or incentivizing employers for further regulating in the new law this issue to open room also for digging deeper on the apprenticeship experiences in the country. So taking this option on board, in this study that Ukraine was participating with Jordan, Kazakhstan, and Serbia, we ETF produce a kind of analytical framework also for with certain categories which can be considered as preconditions for assessing what countries were considering as public-private partnership ground. In this case, so we jumped into the legal framework for public and private private partnership cooperation. We consider also the arrangement, the fiscal arrangements for public-private cooperation. We assess also the traditions, different traditions in the countries on social dialogue and social partnership in and skills. And the last preconditions that we assess also were capacities of stakeholders to engage in policy dialogue and forming sustainable partnerships. So in this slide, you see that this is a cross-country analysis on which the first one on legislation is present for all the countries. The precondition and the fiscal arrangements are mostly present in Jordan and Kazakhstan, but still in Serbia and Ukraine should be further developed, despite different pieces of legislation, but not focusing on the issue of how to promote fiscal arrangements in the BET and skills. The tradition on social dialogue also is long tradition for Jordan, Kazakhstan, and Serbia, and in Ukraine is still under development. The social partnership issues institutionalized, but in ad hoc terms for all of the countries, and the capacities for all of the countries are still to be built. So, having said that, Ukraine selected for this study 3 cases, and the good news is that is another comparative result of this study is that the only in Serbia and in Ukraine, the selected cases can be considered public-private partnerships according to this analytical framework, against this analytical framework, and a questionnaire that we also developed in this study. So the cases for the Ukraine were selected in the issue of practical training centers, internship at enterprises, and participation in education, content, and development. So in the 3 cases, the good news is that the sustainability of these cases in the country, in Ukraine, are very strong. Are also strong the conceptualization in the case of practical training center, because there is a regulation and developed tradition. In the case of internship at companies is also strong because there is a regulation and a long tradition. And in the case in participation in education content development is also strong because there is a regulations and the companies have a lot of experience on this. So we identified also some risks. In the first case is the risk is in the hands of the private side due to the investments. In the risk for internship at enterprise is also private due to their investments in organization of practical training at enterprise. And in the participation of education contents, the risk is shared by public and private actors due to their in-kind investments. So having said that, the investment also in the first case is private. The second is from the private sector plus students, fees that are paid also. So there is an extra partnership approach from the side of the private sector and individuals. And in the case of the participation on the education content is also in the hands also of the private sector. So the initiative, the first is private, the second is joint, and the third is public. So This study also I promise you to share, because in this second presentation that I am giving you is also a commitment from the ETF that we have to make an extra effort on dissemination results. So the second or last insight and a contribution of the ETF to the debate are kind of to close the cycle of the different issues identified in the Green Paper. So our last development, in cooperation also with the Minister of Education and Science, is a survey and a study that we did following some of the conclusions and recommendations on the advisory paper of the Center of Excellence, so which is the conditions of autonomy, on how Ukraine could dig deeper on distributing the responsibilities for better school autonomy and accountability. So in this case, also, it was a strong interest from the Minister of Education on this issue, which is, I think, now also an ongoing debate in the country. And we want to contribute with this study also on supporting this policy dialogue. So the main issues that we identified in the study are the domains for autonomy, and mostly are managerial, financial, and pedagogical. Managerial also the main issue is the focus on staff issues, staff management internally, and also the external management or capacities of the schools for managing networks with external partners. The second dimension is about financial issues, which is also the capacity of the schools for raising and managing funds and distributing their own budget, incomes, etc. And the third one is pedagogical, mainly based on focusing on didactics issues, innovation issues, capacity of teachers and trainers, and learning processes, etc. So the policy functions that we select, so the three core governance levels, to be involved in this process on allocating responsibilities to different actors is the national level, the regional powers, and the better schools. The policy actors that are mostly focusing on schools operations are the better school directors, the teachers, and the workshop instructors, and also we try to identify schools that had in place better school councils, which is a very important issue when we talk about applying the concept of better school autonomy and the role of the school boards and councils as the leaders, real leaders, and governance recipient for managing the school's operations. This is the methodology and a snapshot on the methodology on which we face this study in three phases. The first one was conducting this research, and the Minister of Education advised us to select three pilot regions, which is, in this case has been Poltava, Kharkiv, and Odessa. We there produce, we did three big focus groups, and we profit this focus group to validate a questionnaire, which is the methodological tool for this survey. There we produce a draft report. We tested this questionnaire in the pilot groups. We shape it for, which is one of the objectives of this project, an analytical framework, which is basically a big matrix of functions that should be conducted or driven by the national level, the regional level, and school levels, and with the different actors that I mentioned you, so directors, teachers, etc. So what are the main tasks that can be allocated to these different actors? So the second phase, with the results of this pilot phase, we market ourselves in a big survey with the 24 Ukrainian regions. So we are talking about in this project that we have a lot of information. We collected a lot of information, because the final sample of questionnaires is 963. So we have near 1,000 responses to analyze, and we did it in a first strand. So we produce a final report, which is recently delivered, and it is available from our site also to share with the minister and with other actors that are interested. But in this case, I would say that I have to commit myself to share first with the minister, because also is our main partner. We will share in this week this final report. The survey, so you can see the richness of this tool. We jumped into 41 questions with 276 sub-questions, so we have a lot of information. We had planned in the third phase discuss and disseminate these results. But the COVID is making us remaining at home, and we engage also in the dialogue for this, and also for resources to engage the Youth for Skill project. But of course, it is not only a matter of disseminating the reports. ETF, we think that it deserves a good discussion also, because in the final report we also bring 3 key international practices in the different aspects of the school autonomy, so managerial, financial, and pedagogic, which are Poland, Estonia, and Austria. The key message, the key message that I want to pass you with this report recently produced is that the 3 aspects of the school autonomy identified in the analysis, managerial, financial, and pedagogic, Ukraine is prepared and ready for jumping into these 3 aspects. However, also should be linked to the rationalization and optimization process. This is very important because not all the school will be prepared. So the analytical framework, which as I told you is a big matrix, and I think I am particularly very happy with this piece of the analysis. It's a big matrix allocating policy functions to the different actors, as I told you before. And I think we more or less complete all the boxes and, of this matrix following the findings of the survey. So the main managerial functions that are briefed in this analytical framework are issues about the staff management, educational planning, cooperation with employers, analysis, function, quality assurance, legal framework, and licensing and accreditation. In the financial function also, we jump into the issue of extra budgetary funding, procurement, budget design, use of resources. In the pedagogical functions, we include issues such as training contents, assessment, career counseling for students, teaching and learning process and conditions, and teacher professional development. The main messages that I summarize for you following this big bulk of information are the recommended tax and role distributions for the minister, so the central level, which is mostly focusing on development of requirements, strategies, legal frameworks, criteria, indicators, and principles, methodologies, and other strategic and guiding documents. For the regional bed councils also, because in the regional level we jump into the role of regional education departments and also the potential role of the regional bed councils, are specified in current legislation but should be reviewed. The regional education departments mostly should concentrate on assigning them certain specific tasks which are exclusively related to the VET system. For the VET school, it is a call for increasing tasks of the schools. Of course, we are talking about granting more autonomy for the schools, but also with the role of a school council, which has a lot of important advisory and supervisory functions. The better school directors should also play an increased role. So, and the teachers and also of workshop instructors, which should have also an increased role for advising in strategic decisions in the school operations and to give more autonomy on their professional in development on teaching and learning processes. About the Center of Excellence, also we tested 4 questions in the questionnaire, and of course the Center of Excellence have a lot of expectation from the vet community, and they are seen really as the major drivers for the reform, also informing autonomy and accountability in the potential discussion and policy implementation on better school autonomy in Ukraine. And they are seen as hubs for attracting students and also to inform how these students should be attracted. They should ensure also effective quality assurance, being seen also as reference for this policy issue in Ukraine. And they also should deploy highly effective cooperation with employers for informing the others schools in the regions. So one of the main recommendations that we give also, and it is presented in an annex, is the advice to the minister to launch a pilot project on school autonomy and accountability in the country, which could be mainly designed based on selecting one institution per regions, and this project should be done in 2 years. So let's say the briefing on the for inspiring let's say the terms of reference of this project are briefed in the report. But one of the things that we also think is that the selection of this one single institution per region could be, let's say, a kind of political decision and a preference of the minister on how to do it. So the general findings, just to give you some briefing insights, we, for example, in the realistic options for better schools to generate income or financing, the main, so the questionnaire is mainly based, which is something important to brief you, is based in multiple choice questions. Is also based on different type of Likert scales, and there are some open questions and this specific question for Center of Excellence. Okay, so on this issue of generating income, the 3 major options that the vet community in Ukraine in the 24 regions, because these results are presented in national basis, are the production and selling of goods, provision of services, and renting out premises. About the issue of quality assurance, it should be driven at national level. The hiring and firing directors should be done by the regional powers, and the hiring and firing teachers should be done directly by better schools. About the employers and social partners cooperating for the provision of opportunities for work-based learning, for example, the employers are seen that they should supply of equipment for the better schools, and also advertising of job vacancies in schools are the 2 major preferences on the respondents on the role of the employers on this issue. About the better school tax and cooperation, also with employers and social partners, it should be preferred by the people on the assessment of the quality of in-company trainers, informal agreement with making formal agreement with the social partners, and also the better schools should have the task cooperating with employers as preferred option on monitoring the quality of work-based learning. About the school council, who should be there in the schools? So the people said that employers, teachers, even unions, expert on career guidance, parents associations or representative, and regional vet council representative should be regularly involved in the boards of these schools. About the managerial accountability of better schools, in particular, the schools should be accountable also for the organigram of school management, for setting objectives for school management, and also for executing the key functions of the director. About the advisory function of vet school councils, it should be about training contents, selection of director and dismissal of directors, and also coordinating the employer's cooperation. So as I told you, this is a very rich and recent product that we wanted also to share with you in big dialogue in the country, I think it is going to, it is the main role also is to support the discussion for the minister, appending and the vet community in the regions, appending exercise from the ETF side that we stop also for the COVID reasons, was to complement these national results with regional results, because from the ETF we wanted also to exploit the result using multivariant analysis, because the difference between regions are quite substantial at first sight after our analysis. So the views of the different regions of Ukraine are going to bring richness on this debate, because of course every region also will have to, let's say, agree how to implement this granted autonomy of the centers. I am going to stop here. I am ready to discuss and also to ask you how is going on this debate in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel, for such a detailed presentation of the ETF work. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions, any comments on this presentation? Probably, I don't know, probably the national expert who was involved in this work. Would you like to add something? Rodion Kolishko.
Yeah, Rodion, I am seeing Rodion, and Rodion was working together. We were working together on this, and I think I wanted to see, to listen also his opinion.
Thank you, Manuel. Well, really, I don't have much to add to the very broad picture which Manuel described within this project. That was very interesting and challenging, and hopefully almost all our activities passed before this COVID pandemic, because otherwise it would be very difficult either to travel to regions, meet people, collect data, verify it, and so on. So basically, I'm very glad that among the proposals to the ministry could be the piloting of this, all the results and the possible limits of autonomy of vet schools in different regions. That would be very interesting and big, I would say, verifying process could prove or not prove the proposals in the analytical report. So I would like to thank all regional representatives who supported us in this project, as well as the ministry and the directorate of vet who made great action to support experts in this research, as well as in the fields. So I think this is all I would like to add for the moment, and I'm ready to answer the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rodion. So I see that meanwhile in the chat we have started a discussion, and there were a couple of questions from Arjen. Arjen, would you like to say your questions?
Well, the first one is, what is the most successful incentive to increase the role of employees in vet? And then the second one is, how should centers of excellence support other vet providers? Because they said there's going to be a link to the optimization. How would this work in practice?
Okay, please, do we have any, let's say, suggestions, answers to this question? I see that we had a comment from Volodymyr Kovtunets. Please, colleagues, feel free to discuss these important issues. Yes, Manuel, please.
Well, this question from Arjen related to the
sorry. Sorry, okay, let's one by one. Okay, Manuel started. Volodymyr, sorry, you will, okay, you will speak after Manuel. Sorry for this. Manuel, please go on.
No, I just wanted to say, just following Arjen questions, is that in the PPP study identified these three cases. So I think one clear incentive, so the three cases that are identified in the PPP study that has been also selected by Ukraine are good ways of incentivizing the employer cooperation, also for forging public-private cooperation. So this is one of the main messages also of the PPP study, because the three cases, as I briefed you before, has been identified with a strong sustainability. I think Ukraine should make these cases systemic, so they have to move perhaps to how to discuss, even, I don't know, by laws or whatever, on how to make these cases more systemic. I think the practical training centers is a good case of employers' engagement, and I think perhaps it should be more discussed also from the public side on how to, let's say, somehow regulate the case. On the issue of school autonomy, what we so we face, just to answer your question also, we didn't in our objective was not also to analyze what is the incentive one for the employers to be engaged on school operations, but of course the issue of the school board or the board of trustees, as I see Volodymyr call it, the school councils, yes, we study, and we do believe that for school autonomy, Ukraine should also jump into the role of the school councils as a recipient for promoting employers' cooperation. What we did also in the survey was to explore the different roles that they could have, the people who should be in the councils, and the functions that they should have: advisory, executive, managerial, etc.
Thank you, Manuel. Please, Volodymyr, we give you a word.
Let me clarify my question, because I represent the Federation of Employers of Ukraine, and in many regions, employers are not satisfied with cooperation with vet school, public vet schools, and they insist to be more effective in board of trustees. I would like to mention that school councils is intended body of the school, but board of trustees, it's external body for the school, and board of trustees should represent interest of local governments, of employers, of businesses, etc., etc. So board of trustees really is the only way for employers to make influence on content of training and to make on quality of training. Did you study rule of board of trustees in these three cases? Thank you.
Yes, I presented in my last slide that we, just in a very general way, that we explore the board of trustees, and the message is this. So when we think on granting more autonomy to that institutions in Ukraine, so the role of the board of trustees is essential. and is key also for the employer engagement. We explore in terms of composition, and we explore in terms of different roles that they have to deploy. At this point, I don't know if Rodion wants to add something else, because also he was very much involved on ensuring the quality of the results for Ukraine.
Yes, if you don't mind, thank you, Manuel. Basically, I think we could, what we explored in our study, we explored the wish and possibility to cooperate at the level of school with the so-called wet councils, but not on the regional level, but on the schools level. We didn't name them as the basically, and maybe we could discuss about the definition, what we mean by this. What we understood after study that basically the schools themselves do not understand much what could be the possible limits for such wet councils at the school level. What almost all schools said that there is the great need in cooperation, in different mechanisms of cooperation with employers. And among others, they said that such wet councils at the level of schools could be very fruitful. But there are some points which also have been raised, especially during the personal discussion with schools representatives in the focus groups. Because people said that basically there could be a situation when not many employers would be interested to be engaged in such wet schools, because there is, as previously was said, there is not very satisfying level of existing cooperation between employers and wet schools. So if, for example, in the law tomorrow would be introduced this provision, this doesn't mean that every employer would go directly to wet schools and asking, please include us in such council or the board of trustees, whatever. So this could be a challenge.
Okay, any other comments on this question of the Board of Trustees?
Yes.
Okay, please.
If I can have some comments, actually, we used to name these boards like a supervisory board. For us, it's more convenient, so title for such institutions. But we are trying also to have some regulation for these boards in the draft of the law on vocational education. So Manuel, thank you for the presentation, and we hope to see the final version of this report to maybe for using while we preparing this draft law, and it could be useful for us on this stage. Also, for me, the main results of this research is that our vocational institutions is not ready for autonomy in general, and this is one more challenge for our reform, and also it's one of the issue which we should to resolve, or problem which we should to resolve within the project EU for Skills, because also one of the goal of this project is the school autonomy development, or providing. So it's very important. So I think that it could be another additional discussions, more detailed and more wider, with more wider number of participants and also representatives from other bodies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to add that, and Manuel will confirm it, that initial idea was that we disseminate, we present and discuss the results of this study in Ukraine with all relevant stakeholders. But okay, so in principle, we may still come back to this idea after the quarantine measures will finish. Okay, we continue with the questions and comments, and I see that there was a question from Jens Adam. Jens, would you like to ask your question? Jens, are you here? Can you hear us?
I'm here. So the question was answered already by Yudufi.
Ah, okay. Sorry. Okay. All right. Okay. Sorry. Do we have any more questions? I see there was a comment from Volodymyr on financial autonomy. Would you like, Volodymyr, did you have any question on this, any comment, or it was also answered?
Thank you, Inna. I would like to mention that in Ukraine, all educational institutions are in so-called status budgetary institution. I cannot find any explanation in English resources, English language resources, because in developed countries, budgetary institution means somebody which is with share or allocate budgetary funds. In Ukraine, all institutions, including vet schools, are budgetary institutions. Can you compare financial status of vet schools in Ukraine with the same vet schools in European countries? Thank you.
Manuel, would you like to answer this question?
Well, this is for the case of Ukraine. What we did in this report also is to identify to what type of schools, the different type of schools in Ukraine are belonging to the different laws. Okay, so what we didn't make is to compare with other European countries. The international cases that we bring in the report are focusing in the three aspects on managerial, pedagogic, and financial, just to provide indications on how these countries are implementing these different domains of autonomy. So the report doesn't bring a comparative analysis with other financial practices or ways to implement concept of financial autonomy in other contexts. Also, going back to the comment of Irina on the preparedness of Ukraine for autonomy, I think I agree with Irina, but we didn't want to assess this in the research. So we already, I think we already conclude this in the green paper. So Ukraine still has a lot of way to do for granting autonomy. However, what it brings in this, the study brings really, let's say, a kind of a scenario on the way on which, when optimization and rationalization process will be done, you can use also autonomy for rationalize the network, saying, okay, for that, this is the logic of the proposal of launching a project with one institution per region. So Ukraine should still observe this in a process of, I would say, medium term. So in the short term, it will be very complex for Ukraine to jump in total autonomy, because not is for the also for in my experience working with you, is that you have the capacity and there is capacity in the system, but the conditions of the networks in some cases is not good for doing this autonomy. Even, you know, to give more responsibilities to director, which is, let's say, the one of the preferred options also in this research, according to the informants. So the director capacity should be also empowered, and you will have to learn also somehow to who is doing best, who is doing medium, who is doing low, you know. So that's all.
Let me add something about the pilot schools for autonomy. It could be also in the pilot regions of EU for Skills project, because we will try to change the system of budgeting and funding, and also to provide additional instruments of management in the institutions, like supervisory board, etc. So it's important that this findings of this research should be implemented in the pilot regions with pilot schools that we have. And I think that it's good possibility to understand how it could work in complex when we are trying to gain this holistic approach to understand how all the changes in the system should be applied according to the. And it was one more thing, I think. Okay, maybe I will add later. Sorry. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so if we don't have, do we still have any comments, questions on this topic? If not, we move to the next presentation, to the next topic. On ETF work on development of occupational standards, professional qualifications, and independent assessment. And I give a word to senior expert on qualifications, Arjen Dave.
Yes, if Jose Manuel could stop sharing his screen,
Yes.
then I can.
Yeah. Yeah, Manuel. Yeah, if you.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, fine. So then I'll start sharing mine. Okay, let's see. I have to see. Sorry. Okay, I'll go to PowerPoint. Let me see. Okay, here is one. This is. I just uploaded and that just sorry, this will take a second.
No problem, we'll wait, no problem, it's okay.
So just to introduce, because the presentation will be very fast. So I have now two presentations and they are more technical in nature. So the first one that I start now with is this one, which is about occupational standards and assessment standards and qualifications centers. And it's actually coming from the beginning of all these discussions on the NQF, when the employers, they were really dissatisfied and they wanted to create some kind of parallel structure, a parallel system of professional qualifications. But it's not only about professional qualifications. So I hope you see now the presentation. So now it's starting. So the first point is actually when you look at the labor market, and I always use this slide, which says, okay, what to learn for and how to learn it. And then you see that there are a lot of jobs in the labor market. In the end, we have a lot of learners. And how do we connect these two? Well, there are occupational standards that have the skill requirements for each occupation, and there are assessment qualification or qualification standards that actually set the requirements for assessing whether you're competent. So that's really the starting point. Of course, and there are also educational standards, there are also training programs, and also learners. You can make job descriptions for each individual job. You can make individual programs for each individual learner, but here we focus on occupational standards and assessment standards in this presentation. So, the issue starts actually with the old system, and it's still there in a way, because there's a classifier of occupations, although it's not clear actually who now is responsible for this. It's the Ministry of Economy. There are a lot of qualification characteristics, very many of them, and they are really important in the old system. But they are out of date and they need to be replaced by occupational standards. Occupational standards developed by employers themselves. And that's how this thing started in Ukraine, voluntarily by the employers. There's this SKM project. Of course, there was a repository that was created by the Institute for Professional Qualifications, and there's also the link to their website. In 2018, the Ministry of Labor started to regulate the whole system. So there is this regulation, you will have access to it. There's also a link with applications for occupational standards through the ministry website, and this was created 2 years ago by the agency. And the role of the agency is actually to do a systematic development that will cover all the sectors, because the first standards are very much linked to a number of sectors where there are enormous amount of not enormous because they're not very high numbers, but there are many. Most qualifications are from a few sectors only, and we need to try to get to everybody. We need to have also standards for small and medium enterprises, and also standards for sectors that have not been covered. So we started to work on these guidelines, and these guidelines, they are different from the regulations that are there. So please have a look at these guidelines. We also did training, and we did several trainings, a training in Kiev and a training in different regions where people were trained to develop occupational standards, because also in the project there's this idea of developing 100 profiles. So for these we need occupational standards. They are important. They are an important starting point. So these occupational standards, they inform the education standards and the decentralized education programs, but they also inform the assessment standards, which are really new. Assessment was really a weak element in the standards before. So and also they are important for assessing, of course. Now, what is the key issue is here the idea of independent assessment. So let's not mix the training with the assessment. Let's have an assessment whether we can see whether somebody is really competent. Now, there are three elements in that: assessment, verification of the assessment process, and the certification. And there are a lot of different principles behind it. Now, we've been looking at principles internationally, and we've been looking at practices that already exist in Ukraine, because there is a lot of independent assessment. So here you can see the study visits that we undertook together also with Anatoly, who led this research, where we were looking at examples of independent assessment. Now, it's important to understand that there are educational and professional qualifications in the law and education, and how they're linked is not yet clear enough, I think. But it is clear that these professional qualifications, they are important in order to perform certain jobs. They really recognize that you are competent in that job. Now, what we also see is that there is the need for validation, non-formal and formal learning. And this is especially becoming important when countries move to lifelong learning systems, also in Europe. And it's important that you can have partial qualifications recognized, and you can provide training so that people can move up in what they call upskilling pathways. Now, we've been looking at assessment standards in different countries, and here you can see different countries that have been involved, that have been visited partially, and that have been participating in seminars, from which we have tried to make sort of an overview of what should be the ideal assessment standards. Also, a very important assessors. The assessors need to be professionals, and they need to be competent also in assessing. And you also need other professionals in the system for deal with quality assurance, especially in order to make sure that you get reliable results. Qualification centers. These are examples from Turkey, actually. I've been working there. They've set up the system there very successfully. And they are very much respected. And they are seen completely different because they are owned by the companies and the sectors as an alternative to VET diplomas. Now, when you look at the accreditation process, there are three important issues. That's the management and administration of the certification processes. So how do we make sure we use the resource in the best way? The certification process itself. And then there is also how the certification process is managed. We've been discussing these issues with NAC. There was a very good discussion. Now, it's important that NAC has a very key role in all of this because they are the guarantee for the quality assurance in all of this. So there are issues here that still need to be addressed, in my view. The issue of monitoring, the issue of the self-regulating bodies. But it is clear that this whole new system now, there are new bodies being created, sectoral committees, professional councils, qualification centers, NAC. They are really new, and in all of this, it's very important that people show professionalism and trust. And these things, they are only learning by doing. So, but I'm very optimistic that this process now starts, and this will be an excellent opportunity for the project to support this because it can grow with this new system. So. This is, again, a very quick presentation, just to raise issues. And of course, but so that we can also have some discussion because time is otherwise running out. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, do you have any questions, any comments? This is the time to ask questions. I don't see any questions in the chat, but please feel free to ask any questions. Probably we have some comments from, okay, Rodion has one comment. Yes, you are welcome.
Thank you, Irina. Thank you. Thank Arjen for a very illustrative and quick presentation. It's been a long way which we passed, which we walked together for these years. What I wanted to say that basically I think this project and this project is very important for further understanding of what is the occupational standard and how we could develop it. Because as it was said, process, the start of the occupational standards development was more than 6 years ago, even earlier, basically. But unfortunately, we still don't have the number of occupational standards which could be considered sufficient for the development and for sustainable development of the system. There are different reasons and why it happened, and why not many of stakeholders, of employers were interested in the development, why it was not supported by the government, or is the budget support this process could be a stimulus for those who would like to develop this or not, because we know different country experiences in these country cases. But but in this project and in this in current situation, I think it's a very important to understand what could be or who could be or what could be the driver of the development first of occupational standards, and all this package of instruments and including the assessment standards, because the assessment standards basically are not the only in this scheme, which would really the system of independent assessment and of qualification. Or otherwise, we will not proceed further as efficiently as we should. Even 100 profiles, which are foreseen in this in the EU for Skills document, will not save Ukraine in general. So it could be, and that I'm sure it will be, a good start point, but without clear understanding who would go further when the project will be finished, I think we will not, the system would not be very sustainable.
Yes, if I can react, I'm doing at the moment an evaluation of the new VET project in Belarus. It's called Employment and VET Project. And they have started also with developing occupational standards, and then the idea is that they develop also qualification standards or educational standards for new type, and then new programs that are going to be delivered and tested. The project was a 4-year project, but they lost a lot of time in the beginning. And now they end up with a lot of, they have now only at the moment 12 occupational standards that are developed by, and they're supposed to develop 45. But not only standards, of course, they have to deliver them. They have to actually really make sure that there is that there are real results. So it's important that these things are done quickly in the project, I think. The second thing for me, I think, is that is important is that the work just, this is a question of learning by doing. Yeah, so you need to start to listen to them. But if you see only the occupational standards and you see the assessment standards as an integrated part of them, there is a risk that you only have these larger type of qualifications, maybe not as large as a 4-year course, but they are going to be larger. And it's important that there are also partial qualifications, that there are units that can be used, because that will really facilitate training for adults and recognition of that. So I would be in favor, and the suggestion of having separate assessment standards didn't come from us, from ETF. It came from the ministry. It came from, we had discussions, and I remember Katerina was very much, Mirosnichenko was very much insisting on the importance of that. And I actually agree that that is a good solution, to have separate assessment standards, because also they can focus more on the assessment type of information. Now, there was a question of, there are some questions here of Hanne. Are there already some qualification assessment standards written in learning outcomes? Well, we have tried to. We've tried to work on some examples, but we don't have anything approved yet, because there are not yet assessment standards approved. But assessment was the weak part in the old educational standards. So there are examples from other countries. There are examples of what they should look like. There are some standards that have been developed, occupational standards that could be developed also for assessment. So what's the relation of occupational education and assessment standard? A question from Tommy. Well, first, the occupational standard is the beginning, and that is defined by the people in the world of work. But then the assessment standard is more about what are we going to assess. And that could be for each different module. Yeah. So, and the education standard is more what are we going to learn. So they have a different perspective. But in a way, they could be integrated like in Finland. But then you need also all the parties on the table. And I don't know if that's really easy in Ukraine. Financing of occupational standards. Is it foreseen by the government and budgeted? That's a question, I think, for the colleagues. But then Volodymyr also said no public funding for standards. But of course, the project could support this partially. And then Irina said she has a comment. So maybe it's the first is to give the floor to Irina, then to maybe to Volodymyr, as they represent the institutions. Yes.
Dear colleagues, it's so interesting when we as usual start talking about the standards, occupational or educational or something or assessment standards. For me, it's important. I want maybe please take it like joke, because when I start to analyze this situation from the approaches of analysis of policy analysis, I am trying to define the problem. And for me, it's interesting. What is the problem with occupational standards in Ukraine? Who is unhappy with the lack of these standards? Because as I understand from the part of employers, actually they are good, have good work without the developed professional or occupational standards. So for me, in our further steps with National Qualification Agency, is also important to try to define this problem in the sphere of qualification. For me, first of all, is the absence of any regulation in this system, because we have the law on national qualification system. We have some points in the law on education, and it's like strange thing here in Ukraine, because it's like a different system where is involved and employers and higher education, vocational education, etc. And it's important to understand which steps we should have in these directions. But if we are looking for this situation within the project, and what is important for us now, it's to act within the project and within the plan that we have. It's important to provide these revised or some new educational standards for vocational institutions, which will also respond to the demand of employers in the sphere of the activity, of economic activity. And it's important to have this like unique approach for assessment of learning outcomes and how they should fit to the occupational standards. So yes, in Ukraine, the responsibility for occupational standards developments is for employers. But we like the most involved person in this process. We are very interested in this development, because we should produce or develop our vocational education standards on the basis of occupational standards. But as for the question of Roman, we have no any fund. We have any funds for occupational or educational standards. We do it like by ourselves within all those activities that we have in our institutions.
Yes, maybe Volodymyr, if you also want to comment, also as a member of the board of NAC, now that Yuri has left the meeting.
Dear Arjen, dear colleagues, many thanks to ETF for their approach, their support of NQ8 Start. Really, we have a website, we are launching a register of qualification, we drafted regulation concerning accreditation of assessment centers, etc., etc. But let me come back, return to this discussion main line concerning occupation standards. Of course, employers are the most interested in development of occupational standards. I can compare some educational standard and occupational standards for some branches of economy, and there is a fundamental distance between these documents, what the business needs and what education can propose. But the system of occupational standard development launched 2 years ago appeared to be too bureaucratic. For example, right now we have only 25 standards. Almost 50 standards are developed but are not approved. It depends on reorganization of government, but the system should not be mainly too bureaucratic to stop the process. Really, we may have almost 100 occupational standards if the government will work more effectively. But concerning your topic, I would like to mention two important principal questions concerning content of occupational standards. First of all, current approved occupational standard does not consist in provision concerning assessment. The position of the Ministry of Government is that assessment standard should be part of occupational standard. It's good as for me, but we have to amend current occupational standard in such a way. The second is we discovered that descriptors of our occupational standards don't correspond to a national qualification framework. They are different. I see that when changing descriptors of NQF, we have not to change all occupational standard, but new occupational standards should be developed on the basis of NQF. They have to be designed in terms of NQF to classify them on NQF. And the next, maybe more important question, learning outcomes and competencies. Oftenly in our regulations, in our legislations, we use this term as equivalent or similar, but it is not true. It contradicts European Union Council recommendation 2017, and international standards, where competence means ability of person to apply knowledge and skills and other learning outcomes. Learning outcomes mean more than only knowledge or only skills. This is a more wide concept, and the competence means ability to apply for even some goals. So we have to change methodology of the development of occupational standard to harmonize it with current European processes. And we will be thankful for all our partners to help in harmonization this process with the European standards. Thank you.
If I can comment, in my country, we've been struggling with how many standards we need and how should they be developed since mid-90s. And every time we have a reform and we do it differently. But it's important that things are happening. And I agree with Rodion that, these occupational standards are very important. They need to be developed. There need to be more of them. They need to be stimulated. And I worked also with Romania, which took a loan from the World Bank to develop its first occupational standards and then said, but now it's up to the private sector to fund it. Well, that's not the way you get a qualified workforce in a country. If something of a national interest, then these standards need to be also subsidized through national means. We've been discussing this also in the past, and it could be done. There have been different sources mentioned for this purpose. It is very important that there is funding for these standards, otherwise it will not happen. Now, on whether they should be integrated or not, for me they are specific. Qualification standards are about specific type of qualifications, and you have smaller and bigger qualifications, and occupation standards are, for me, they are raw material. They are there to inform these assessment standards, but these assessment standards can be for something which is limited in scope, or something that is very broad in scope, actually covering several occupational standards. So in my view, I think it's good to keep them separate. That's what is the practice in most countries. They have different qualification types, but that's part of my next presentation. So are there any questions left? Otherwise, we move to the next presentation. Right. So for me, you never get it right with these things. You just need to start working on them, and then review, and then improve. Yeah. So now the last presentation that I have. Sorry, I just do the same as before. That is, we go now to the next step, actually, which is the issue of VET standards and curricula, because this, of course, is very much linked. Yeah, so when we start talking about this issue, we have had a lot of discussions about this topic, especially, of course, because this is the interest of the VET system. And when we look at these VET standards, they were state educational standards, and they were multi-purpose documents, very big documents. And Ala Lucka a few years ago made a very good historical presentation of how these standards changed until that time. But you can see these Soviet standards, they were very big, 120 pages. And of course, they started from these qualification characteristics, but then somehow midway they were miraculously translated into subjects, and they were also weak on assessment. So we look at new standards, and new standards have been going on for quite some time now, and there were already some modular VET standards, but sometimes they develop from occupational standards, sometimes they develop directly like that. Of course, then you don't know if they're really relevant or not, but here is one of them. We have done an evaluation. Vidmantas Tutlis from Lithuania, he's also able to read in Ukrainian. He has looked at all the available standards, and he's been looking at all the occupational standards that were available and all the educational standards that were so-called competency-based, and we see that there were very many different models. So we said, look, we need to get to one way of producing those, and that's where this scheme comes from. Occupational standards, let's go work on occupational standards to develop education standards. And then let's move to the decentralized education programs, because this is essential also of the new VET system. They are decentralized. They are going to be defined by the schools. And the fact that you have learning outcomes actually allows that. Now you can see the education standard is actually, we have also something that's called the education program, which did not exist before. This is the program of the whole program, the standard of the whole program used by the school. So we have been working a lot also with the Estonian colleagues, because Estonia is a very good example. They have really made successfully this change to a competency-based system. They have institutions like Innove, they have institutions like Kutsekoda, they produce the standards, they put them into practice. And we have worked very closely with the Estonian project. Maybe the colleagues can also comment on this. Of course, the new Ukrainian school is an approach towards a competency-based system in general education. And this is also going to affect VET. And it's going to affect VET from 2027 onwards. And the strategy for modern VET ends at that year. So that's more or less how this should work. Now, a key issue, key difficulties that we're dealing with in translating the occupational standards into education standards is, for instance, the basic block. And the basic block can be different things. If you read from different sources, you can see that there is more or less a general understanding that this is about those skills that you need in order to learn a profession. But whether they are general education or they are general professional ones, and also here you can see in the strategy, you have here key competences and vocational and general professional competences that everybody has to learn. So how are we using the occupational standards to derive these from, or are these added on? What we see is in this modular approach is that this situation where we are now in, this COVID-19 situation, actually can help, because there's going to be a lot of e-learning, and e-learning is very good for developing modules. Here we have a very good example, for instance, from Kharkov, where they have developed very good e-learning materials. Now, work-based learning also is growing, and also this offers really good opportunities, because the situation in every enterprise is different. So learning outcomes become important rather than content, rather than standardizing what people have to learn exactly. They have to learn in real situations, and that allows. So here we are talking about the difference between methodologies. So far, the process has been pretty centralized, and there were always methodologies, and there were sets of rules and procedures that were decided nationally, and we started to work on guidelines. Here is an example of two sets of guidelines. These are the guidelines for educational standards, and we have not yet an agreement on what these educational standards should look like, but here are the main principles. These guidelines are developed by Viktor Parsnitsky in cooperation with people from the ministry, in cooperation with people from the regional centers, and in cooperation, and they work from the basis that they are developed from occupational standards. And here in the guidelines, there's an explanation of foreign experience, there's an explanation of how are you actually translating these occupational standards into educational standards. And these are other guidelines that were developed by Zoya Parfenyuk from the regional center in Volyn region, and I like these very much. They build also on our seminar, and they are really explaining what is a module and how modular education is different from subject-based education. And they talk about the basic principles, but also about how do you elaborate modules, how do you use them in teaching and assessment. And this also uses the examples that we had from Finland and Estonia. Now, in a decentralized system, all these things need to be decided more at a lower level. They will be defined at a lower level. So we need to have more guidance, more training, more people empowered, more people engaged in defining modules and in using them. So if you look at those 100 profiles, well, you have occupations, you need to decide which occupations you have, which occupational standards we develop, which educational standards we develop, educational programs, modular training programs, teaching and learning, assessment and certification. You need to be ready now in order to start, actually. So it's very limited time, but you can do it, in my view, because the Ukrainians have shown that they are all very resourceful. They're all very capable. So in the international project, it's really important to build on the local capacity, because that's your chance. Thank you very much.
Do we have any comments, questions on this presentation of Arjen on educational standards, on development of modular training programs? Any comments from the VET Directorate? you decided to get together. I see Irina and Galina and Nina.
And Julia, yes, we are here.
Okay. Any comments probably from the project experts, from the partners from Estonia or Finland? I don't see any questions or comments in the chat, so we are expecting your feedback.
Inna,
Yes.
I was wondering, I mean, taking into consideration the situation, we have now seen the ETF presentations. Just spontaneously, a question to the project: what are there any changes being made now to the project due to the situation? I mean, our presentations address some of the components of the project, but are there changes within the overall project planned already now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Do anybody representative of the project? I don't see now. I should see if Michael or Jens or Roman, would you like to give us an update on the project implementation and what are, let's say, some modifications which were probably made, and also how the project is adjusting to the current situation of quarantine, probably. Who would like? Yeah, we have still.
Yes, Ina, I'm just shortly saying something on behalf of my colleagues. As you might know, the description of action was prepared last year, and we also checked all results. That means the log frame for the project until December 2019. And what we are having now is a working plan. That means we have an agreement also with the ministry, with the National Qualification Agency, on how we want to move forward. And I think we are still using the input from the ETF for preparing our activities. That means a strong focus would be really there on the national qualification framework, on the development of standards, on the optimization of the VET network, and then on teachers training and the establishment of an assessment system in selected regions. Now you ask me, what are we changing due to the current crisis? Of course, we are always a little bit sticking to the commissioning and co-financing documents which were signed last year, but still there is also some flexibility. What we discussed already with the ministry is that we would have a mainstreaming approach. That means we would look into ongoing activities and would cross-check whether we can include digital solutions, blended learning options into our ongoing activities. One example there is, for example, we would have a discussion, particularly with the Finnish colleagues, with IDOFI, whether we can include blended learning formats for teacher training, so that maybe to a certain part, face-to-face lessons and training is not required. I think we are already in the beginning of this process, but I think at least in the next month, we would have a little bit of a knowledge on how we will deal with this situation. Besides the teacher training, there's also one effort to improve the website infrastructure of the schools, so that there can be really some form of communication also with trainees in case there is once more a quarantine announced. So we still need to acknowledge that this COVID-19 is a tremendous has a tremendous impact on training, particularly because schools are closed and most of the schools are really based on face-to-face lessons, and no training can be provided. And so we are just having in the next weeks a look into our ongoing activities there, and hopefully in June, or at least then in the next steering committee meeting where also the ETF colleagues would be present, we can brief you about what came out of this discussion.
Hello, it's Kirsi here. Can I make a comment?
Yes, of course, Kirsi.
Yes,
yes.
I'm from the Commission and Support Group for Ukraine, and I think also that this question was very, very important. How can the project go on in this kind of situation? And I also agree that now the project should be analyzed. How could we work during the coming weeks and months by using different kind of distance methods? And this is also important because I think that in the future we will need more knowledge and skills, having situations where we cannot meet each other only by using distance tools. And it's also a very important model, I think, for students to find out more also in vocational education and training, how to use electronic learning environment in their studies and their learning process. And that's why I think that we should discuss more about what is possible now in this project, and maybe have also a steering committee meeting about the situation.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Thank you very much. This is very important comment. Do we have any other comments on this issue? Any other reactions? Yes.
Maybe just to reply also to continue on what Kirsi was saying, just for a point of information that ETF is doing a mapping of the situation in all the partner countries, especially in our sector, and we are looking at different ways to go forward, how to support the partner countries in the immediate future, because the situation is immediate, so no time to wait so much. And we have a weekly update that we are sharing also on the situation, and of course we will share also with the project and the project stakeholders the information and proposals for initiatives to support the countries. And once again, of course, please do use the open space for all kinds of information, but on the specific situation, we preparing this summary report and we'll come up with the initial proposals.
Okay, thank you. Then, if we don't have any other questions or comments, shall we then pass to the closure of the webinar? Arjen, Outi, can we?
Ina, may I have some comment? I'm sorry, we had the problem with connection, so I
yes,
could
please. Yes, of course.
Whole speech of Kirsi. So, but I've heard the ending of, and we think, and we also want to underline that with all this digitalization issues is very important now for Ukraine, for vocational educational institution, because we understand that we have no such like resources, like physical resources, also materials for studying in this. It's a big challenge for all our system, but what we have now with the project at our last meeting, also like online meeting, we start this conversation and this discussion about how we can improve or change, which activities we can change within the project to maybe strengthen in the future distance learning and digitalization in that.
Okay, thank you. This is also very essential comment. Okay, do we have any other comments? I see here some feedback on the webinar. I don't know if people would like participants like Anneli Temes. Would you like to say this, or shall I shall I read it? Anneli, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah.
Yes,
well, I think I have written all here, but this was really the very best webinar. I have been participating in some of these during the last few weeks, and congratulations, Inna. You are really excellent chairperson. You have been able to manage the time schedule, and technically everything went so well. Of course, the most important thing was the excellent contents, and it was nice to hear colleagues from Ukraine, from Torino, from elsewhere. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anneli. Thank you. Okay, then shall we then close the webinar? And at this point, I give back a word to Outi Karkainen.
Thank you, Inna. I would just like to, I almost closed the seminar already with my previous intervention, just to say, continue on that ground. I understand that the project has been negotiated, and there is the basic project agreement and documents and financing agreement and agreements among the donors what the project will be about. So there, of course, I understand there's a limitation for any adaptation, or let's say a big adaptation, because it's a project to support the reforms, and reforms are long term, and probably there will be, according to the needs, of course, some urgent support by donors, and including EU, which can be mobilized more flexibly and faster to support the EU's partner countries. So my comment was not to say that the EU for Skills project will be the main project to support the immediate emergency. But of course, we could think about ways how this project will also prepare the future, and once we understand what the future will be like in the sector of education and training. Once again, thank you for all the thank yous. I think that the ETF team made a great work. Manuela, Ariane, Inna, IT, and all the others. And I would like to thank all the participants again. Like I said, we will be sharing the mapping, we will be sharing the minutes of the webinar. And I do invite you to also use our open space, for which you received the links in the chat. I would like to wish you all a lot of courage in this situation, and let's keep in contact. And we think about you every day at the ETF, let's say so. I would like if Arjen, Ina, Manuel, as key experts for the Ukrainian team, ETF Ukraine team, would like to say some words to the end, I would close here, and thank you very much.